Foundation. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning for the 2017 webinar series, Solutions for Rural Development. This month, our topic is a refresh on the National Main Street Framework. So before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping details. If you are having trouble hearing me right now, or if you're at the webinar seeing the slides, first for audio, make sure the volume is turned to the appropriate level. And for visual, make sure all other programs or windows are closed. Sometimes that messes up with the speed of the actual webinar time. If you experience any severe issues, try logging off and logging back on to the platform. Sometimes resetting the program is all that needs to happen for it to start working again. Just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available to you afterwards once the recording has processed. And if we could, we're going to hold the question and answer till the end of the presentations. There's a chat box to the left of your screen, which will ask you to type your questions into, and we will then read them out loud and hand them off to the appropriate speaker. All right, so this is me, just so you have a little visual of what I look like. And I have experience working in rural communities with natural resource management, community development, and sustainable tourism development. And our presenters for today, Ms. Lonnie Lott of Arizona Downtown Alliance has over 20 years experience in the field of downtown development and economic revitalization. She's worked with Main Street programs, business improvement districts, downtown organizations, and other nonprofits throughout the Southwest. Mr. David Crummy is the founding member of Rail Mesa, Retail Arts Innovation and Livability, and has worked directly with cities, businesses, and community organizations and nonprofits to strategize and focus work for both large and small scale businesses to benefit residents and to support these small businesses, or large businesses for that matter. And Mr. Eric Vondi has 12 years experience working with historic preservation and currently is the Preservation Incentives Coordinator with Arizona State Parks. So we're going to get started, and I will be handing the mic over to Ms. Lonnie Lott.
Thank you, Maya, and welcome everyone. How exciting to be able to present on an overview of the refreshed Main Street 4-point approach. So before I dive into what the new refresh approach is and some of the elements that are involved, I just wanted to go back and remind us all of the value of the National Main Street Program and just a little bit of history or background regarding the National Main Street Program for those who may not be very familiar with it. It's been a successful model for commercial revitalization for over 35 years. It is a grassroots dedication economic development program based in historic preservation that works at the local level. It's a very grassroots, local level driven approach. It is supported and expertise is provided by coordinating programs. And our Arizona State Main Street program, I'm proud to say, is coordinated by the State Office of Historic Preservation, which is housed in Arizona State Parks. Direction is provided by the National Main Street Center, and the 4-point approach has been an effective and useful framework to help organize and implement activities, programs, and projects at the local level. And really, the power of Main Street sits within the data that has been collected and compiled since 1980. So since its beginning, really, communities within the Main Street, the National Main Street Network, have been asked to submit data that they collect at the local level. And then it's combined, and at an aggregate level, it's presented on demonstrating the positive impact that downtown revitalization using the Main Street 4-point approach has had on these communities. So cumulative, there's been over close to $6 billion in reinvestment in the communities that are using the approach since 1980. As you can see, 115,000 plus new businesses have been created, 502 new jobs, 246,000 plus buildings have been revitalized. And these are just the high level statistics. There's a number of other statistics that they do collect, including public investment and private investment dollars. At our state level, the Arizona Main Street program was originally brought into legislation in 1986. And for a long time, it was housed in the Arizona Department of Commerce. A few years ago, though, we moved the state Main Street program, and now it's housed, as I said before, in Arizona State Parks. The Arizona Preservation Foundation and the Arizona Downtown Alliance, which is a program of the foundation, was formed to really provide technical assistance, support the state Main Street program with networking opportunities, and really working in the field and getting the best practices out to the local level. Currently, the state designated communities in our state is Casa Grande, Globe, Nogales, Prescott, Safford, Sedona, and Vail. In its heyday, we had close to 20 communities that were state designated. But for a number of reasons, communities choose not to use the 4-point approach or not be state designated, and therefore they're not listed here. However, I would say from my experience of working in the field, there's a number of rural communities as well as urban communities that are using the 4-point approach to really be organized and implement projects at the local level. Here is the statistics from the Arizona Main Street program that we have been collecting since 1986 through last year. And again, as you can see, very positive impact at the local level. These are net new jobs, net new businesses, public improvement projects, property acquisitions, and building projects. So the question is, why are we looking at a new refresh Main Street model when the existing one worked so well? Well, there was a number of reasons at the National Main Street Center started to look at, is there a better approach, a better strategy that we can roll out and be more effective? And this really came because the program has been around for 35 years. And we know there's been a lot of change in our downtown districts, our commercial districts, our neighborhood districts. And so the community development field has really changed in these 35 years. There's new trends to build on and principles. And revitalization must always be inclusive and representative of the community. It's a place's distinctive characteristics and fostering a strong local business environment. And then they looked at the refresh to ensure that the continued success of the Main Street model in revitalizing older and historic business districts. So to look at this, the Main Street Refresh Task Force at the national level was created. And for a number of months, they looked at various elements and various communities and really came back with some major findings and opportunities as well as some challenges. So the opportunities and findings was that the new landscape and community revitalization field, Main Street needs to be at the forefront of conversations about transportation, land use, sustainability, housing, equity, and more. Not just looking at their historic districts and focusing on saving businesses or adaptive reuse for businesses, putting on events to draw target markets to the community, some of those very grassroots levels, but that Main Street needed to really be in all of the conversations that impact a community or a region. The findings were that the 4 points is a solid framework, but should not be the primary focus of the work. And then national conversation around place and demographics, etc., trends, return to downtown and is working in Main Street's favor. Downtown is hip again, and we're seeing now after the recession that a lot of new entrepreneurs are looking at downtown to open their ventures. We're seeing new development in historic buildings. We're seeing that downtown is once again a priority for at the local level, regional, and even state level. So what were some of the challenges that the Refresh Task Force saw? They saw that Main Street organizations are sometimes not viewed as serious economic development organizations. And working in the field for 20 plus years, we're always about economic development or economic vitality, strengthening those existing businesses, looking for new businesses to add to that mix, and helping other businesses expand and grow in the districts. But for some reason, Main Street may not have that perception, or that just may not be seen as an economic development organization. Communities outside of the Main Street network are interested in Main Street, but see it as being not for them. And again, there's a lot of reasons why this may be. People's perception are often a reality, and like many organizations, sometimes Main Street was in a community, the leadership may have changed, businesses come and go. Many communities in our state of Arizona chose not to be a state designated Main Street for a number of reasons. And so there was always something that was seen about the name of Main Street or the organization, and not really focusing on the structure or the framework that really drives the programs and the revitalization efforts. The perception that Main Street is being too rigid, requiring a very specific kind of organizational model that does not fit in their existing structure. And this can be true in the beginning of the Main Street movement. It was advocated that the best model was to be a freestanding nonprofit or organization that partnered with the public sector. And so again, especially our rural communities in Arizona and across the nation, there's just not a lot of capacity to continue to support nonprofits. And often it was perceived that Main Street may be competing with the chamber, not being a partner with the chamber. And so often this was the reality. That is no longer the case. And we're seeing lots of different models of how the Main Street 4-point approach is implemented, and the capacity is built within the local level to really see impact and deliver the type of programs and resources that need to happen to revitalize their area. And then finally, the misconception that Main Street is for towns of a certain size or demographic. And in our case in Arizona, that was true up until 2009. The legislation actually was very rural development driven, and any community that's set in Maricopa County or Pima County could not be a designated Main Street program. But once the program was moved over to Arizona State Parks, that's no longer in the legislation language, and any community, any neighborhood district, any metro city can strive to be a designated Main Street program. But I always want to say that any community, whether you're a official Main Street program or not, can use the 4-point approach to help organize. And so that kind of leads us into why is the 4-point approach so valuable? And it does provide that strong framework, and it serves as an excellent internal checkpoint to ensure that we have a holistic, comprehensive approach for guiding our efforts at the local level. So the Refresh Main Street approach, this is, I like this kind of visual. It's missing a few things, but because they're supposed to fly in, well, we're not flying them in today. But as you can see, the 4 points, or as I like to call them, the 4 pillars, are still very much intact, and they include organization, promotion, design, And we call it economic vitality at the national level, just because it is really about strengthening that economic base that exists by working with the existing businesses, helping them stabilize, grow, expand, and then as new entrepreneurial ventures come into the district, helping them become part of that economic fabric of that area. So the new refreshed Main Street approach, there are three tightly integrated components involved. Now, these are not going to probably be very different to you for those communities that have been going through general plan updates, downtown specific plans, strategic planning, but the elements are all very key, and you'll find that they build on each other. So the first component is really the community visioning and market understanding. And I'm going to go into each of these in a little bit of detail. The second component is the transformation strategies, or I like to call them your very high-level goals. And these are implemented and supported through the 4-point framework. And then the final one, which we all do in our communities because we always need to report return on our investment, is what is the impact and measurement that you're going to look at regarding those transformation strategies. So again, what are the expected outcomes from implementing the transformation strategies or high-level goals using the 4-point approach that you are expecting so that you can move closer to your community vision that you have for your specific commercial district or historic downtown. So the first one, community visioning, and I'm sure I could go through the number of attendees, and we've all been through community visioning. They can be fun, they can be frustrating, but this is really the opportunity that a community has to bring the stakeholders together and really ask the question, what do we want our specific commercial district, historic downtown area to be? Visioning is always about looking into the future. It is dreaming sometimes. I like to say when I'm facilitating that if you were king or queen for the day, what would your downtown look like, be like, feel like, economically operate as, who would be coming to your district? So it's really giving the opportunity for the community to be engaged in the process and really vision for what they desire for that specific area. To balance that vision, we then look at market research. What can the market support? And this is always very attractive to those economists out there because it includes looking at data. Who is the demographics? Who's coming to your downtown? Where are some of the gaps in your sales tax? Are you leaking, or do you have a surplus? Who's coming to your downtown areas? And what are kind of the trends that can support your vision? For example, some of the trends that we're seeing across our communities, both urban and rural, is the growing restaurant sector and the independent restaurateur. And with that comes other uses, and it helps strengthen the locals coming back to your downtown to enjoy a meal, or helping generate some more inner evening type of activities. So that's one of the trends that we're seeing. And a lot of those entrepreneurs, restaurateurs, are looking for that very unique setting or place or building to set up their restaurant. And they're often investing in those historic buildings that may have been underutilized. So again, the community visioning is that process that brings stakeholders of all sectors together, inviting them to be proactive participants in the revitalization process. I love that word, proactive. And of course, stakeholders include business owners, property owners, organizations that are supporting activities and programs that are in the downtown area, residents, often tourists, anybody that has a stake in your specific area, your downtown area. And I like to say everybody has a stake because nobody really owns the downtown area. Everybody has a stake in it being a vibrant, healthy area. And then also the community visioning provides a foundation for outlining the community's own identity, expectations, and ideal, while confirming real and perceived perception, needs, and opportunities. And those are often based in, like I said, secondary data, which comes from the US Census or economic development studies, as well as primary data, which may be what you don't really can easily gather, such as who are the visitors coming to the area, or those tourists or other markets. So for today's exercise, because we're going to run through this quite quickly, is that we're going to say, for example, the community we just conducted a visioning for, they decide they want to become a regional arts and cultural hub. Surprise, surprise, right? So that is what their vision is. That's what they see for their community, for their specific area, their downtown area, or let's say it's the community-wide. But for this, we're going to say it's a regional arts and cultural hub. So then we step into the second component, and that's really looking at drafting those community transformation strategies. What are the strategies that are going to help the community make that transformation to be that arts and cultural hub? And we like to look at these at very high level. They don't get into the specific activities or projects. Those are more buried in those 4 pillars of the 4 points. But what are those overarching strategies that are going to help us move closer to that vision? And they help guide the direction of that revitalization initiative. It brings some substantial transformation. It's reflective of the community's vision. It's based on a solid understanding of the district's economic opportunities. Again, going back to that market research, saying from either the primary source or the secondary source, and this is really where a community would say, we've seen artists opening up some studios, we have a new art walk, we have murals. We really feel that we can position ourselves as that artist and cultural hub, because this is where all of those type of economic drivers are happening. Whether that's one of your cultural events that you've grown into a signature event, like Casa Grande Street Fair, where they're pulling in from a very large radius, and that is the signature event, and it is based in their arts and culture. Then these transformation strategies are implemented through the 4-point framework. They're measurable and reevaluated every 2 to 5 years. Again, a lot sounding like a strategic plan, right? So typically communities will find 2 or 3 community transformation strategies. I like to recommend 3, and then the 4th one being about organizational capacity, focusing really strongly on growing that resource base, the community's ability to really move those transformation strategies to have impact. So going back to our vision of an art and cultural hub, a regional art and cultural hub, a short-term strategy that this community might identify would be to develop a public mural program engaging local students as artists. My little picture there, I'm just going to give a little plug for the beautiful art project that Casa Grande did, and I love this one. And a longer-term strategy could be to develop that form-based planning codes to promote housing for artists and cultural workers, providing for lived workspace without requiring special permits. And of course, that takes a lot more heavy lifting because it might have some regulatory issues around it. You need to engage your city or county municipality planning and zoning departments, and that takes a little bit more heavy lifting, so we look at that as longer term. And then you work on these strategies aligned within the 4 points. And I'll go a little deeper into that in a second. And then the third component again is looking at the impact and measurements, or those outputs. Qualitative outcomes, little harder to measure, because qualitative is that experience, that those things that are less tangible to pull down. Quantitative, those are a little easier. Growth in the sales tax, growth in the housing units, growth in new business startups or new businesses, new jobs. And then demonstrate wise use of resources, real change on the ground, those new jobs, those new businesses, those buildings redeveloped, and numerous other metrics, which can be measuring volunteer hours, which we encourage all nonprofits to do. So the Main Street 4-point approach, now we've filled in those arrows and the pillars. So on the left-hand side, we start with that community vision and that market understanding. And then we develop those 2 to 3 to 4 transformation strategies, all pointing towards qualitative and quantitative outcomes. And then as you see underneath each of those strategies sits the 4 pillars: the design pillar, the organization pillar, the promotion pillar, and the economic development or vitality pillar. And you want to think about those pillars as those are where the activities, the programs, the actual things that are going to be implemented in the ground at the ground level that are going to move that strategy forward. And so those are usually your action plan, your shorter term 1-year priorities. Those would be in, your activities, who's going to be responsible, the budget, the funding, the timeline, and the matrix. For example, if we were going to say we wanted to implement a mural program and encourage young artists, in the design component, we may look at the guidelines. Are we going to need guidelines for a mural program? Do we already have a mural program guidelines, but they may need to be refreshed? That would sit in there in the design piece of it, as well as what buildings or how are we going to, where are we going to implement the murals? Are they going to be permanent? Are they going to be on a building? Are they going to be something that is temporary, much like what David's going to get into about Mesa? And then organization is where are we going to find the resources to actually implement the mural program? And promotion, of course, is how are we going to promote the mural program as a attraction or as a piece of bringing folks downtown to see them? Are we going to do it through our website, through our brochure? Do we already have some venues? And then again, economic vitality. What is it going to do for the economics of our downtown? Is it going to create additional synergy among businesses? Is it going to be another attraction that's going to bring in new folks? Are we going to look at activating a new building that's going to have a new use in it, that's going to be an art gallery? So those are all of the pillars. So we kind of dig down deep and implement the specific projects that are going to lift that transformation strategy to a reality that's going to move you closer to your vision. So here is a different look at it. This is the old circle model. Again, nothing has changed. Those 4 pillars, those 4 areas that are key to lifting any type of goal, driving revitalization, are still in place. They're still the framework. So some of the benefits of the refreshed approach is that it puts focus on economic impact, creating potential for more significant change on Main Street. And really, we always knew that everything we did in the Main Street 4-point approach is looking at building a stronger, more vibrant, economically sustainable district. But this just puts more focus on it, the new refresh. It stresses, once again, broad community engagement to ensure that support for Main Street's vision, because it takes a village, takes an entire community to really revitalize their downtown. It engages all programs to focus on tangible outcomes, that help communicate impact, and it offers greater organizational flexibility, allowing Main Street to choose how to organize based on local needs. This is my contact information, and I just want to say that at the upcoming 2017 Arizona Historic Preservation Conference, which will be June 14th through the 16th in Oro Valley, we have been asked, and I'm so honored to say that we will be doing a 4-hour lab on Wednesday, the 14th, as part of the conference, specifically on the community transformation strategies, helping communities dig way down deep and actually look at how to apply that model and the type of activities they would want to, the action plan. So we're very excited about that, and a colleague from New Mexico who's been working on the community transformation strategies in their statewide Main Street program for the last 5 years will be joining me. So mark the calendars, and I think Eric will talk about that in his presentation. But thank you very much, and I'm going to hand it over to David.
Thank you, Lonnie. That was fantastic. So my name is David Crummy, and among other things, I was one of the founding members of the Rail Mesa group, or Retail Arts Innovation and Livability, where we focus and advocate for increased citizen participation, responsible development of housing, transit options, and the creation of good jobs. But more than anything, just bringing people together around our Main Street. And so what I want to talk to you about is how we just started doing things, some of the issues that we ran into and how we found ways to get around it, and how you can do that too. So welcome to downtown Mesa. If you haven't visited, we were at one point in the past in competition for the most beige per capita in America. I like to joke. But downtown is basically a small town downtown hidden inside of a giant community. And especially since our highway moved away in the 70s, our downtown was lagging. I even had a ASU professor say that, you know, a downtown is truly dead when they start installing statues of people, which we did in one of our many efforts to try and engage and bring more people to our downtown. So one of the things that we started doing about 8 years ago was inviting our community to be a part of what we're doing. We started with something called Jane's Walk, which is really named after Jane Jacobs, which is a national, or actually international organization that encourages people to get together and walk through the communities. And we conduct what's called walking audits or bike audits, where you just invite the community, invite your neighbors, walk down the streets, but have a conversation. Take a look at your community with a critical eye. What are your opportunities? So these were inspired by, of course, Jane Jacobs and then another gentleman, Dan Burden of the Walk Institute. And our very first event, which I had no idea would have anyone come to, it drew more than 70 people, and some of them only a handful, but all of them were worthwhile, and being able to find people that were interested and wanted to be active in the community, and also just finding out, what does the community want? The other thing that we learned is that we didn't have a lot of money, and we didn't have a huge number of volunteers, so we had to leverage our assets. And some of the assets that we ended up using were rocks, empty lots, beige columns. We did have a community garden. We have some alleys that were city-owned. And we had a small group of people that wanted change and wanted to get things done. So people tell people to either go pound dirt or pound rocks. That's what we did. We had a small arts group that was meeting intermittently at a local coffee shop. And one of the local organizers, one of the local business owners, thought it would be a great idea to just grab some rocks from in front of the store, in front of the other stores on the main street, and decorate them at this event. So she went and picked up as many of the rocks about the size of your fist as she could find up and down Main Street. And and brought them to a Sunday afternoon where we had a bunch of friends and family members and other business owners working on this. And they just drew them, funky saints and beautiful pieces, and we dropped them off up and down Main Street, basically where we found them, as sort of a quick, decorative, quirky addition to Main Street that was pretty easy. At the end, I'll talk to you about some of the problems that we had, but that was fun. So one of the other projects we worked on is the barrel wayfinding project. We had the question or problem of we really wanted to do a full wayfinding problem. We had full wayfinding solution. We hadn't done one in about 20 years. Things had changed, but we know that doing a complete wayfinding program would be many, many tens of thousands of dollars, and no one was willing to spend that, but we still wanted to get things done. So we had a vacant lot, and we thought that it would be great to put up a sign to show where all the businesses are. So the idea is that many hands make light work. So we found one of our neighbors that was an introvert and wanted to be involved but didn't want to have to go out. So we put them in charge of mapping all of the properties from this site, going into Google Maps, how many minutes, walking distance is it, and he pulled all of that out and put it into a really nice spreadsheet, and we figured out how many of these we could fit onto that. And a couple businesses wanted to actually make their own, and so we let them, but mostly it was us. So our total project cost was overall pretty cheap. Some of the funding from our local business assistance nonprofit called the Neighborhood Economic Development Corporation, or NEDCO, helped us buy the wood and the barrel, but overall it was funded by volunteers and in-kind donations. We wanted to be ridiculous as a prototype. We found this 15-foot tall 4x4, which we centered in there and basically fit as many pieces as we could. And we met and painted all of these over a course of a couple nights in the backyard of one of our business owners. And we had another group came out and welded a steel plate on the bottom so we could anchor it into the concrete. And it stood for more than 2 years now. We need to go out and add some more pickets for the businesses that have been added and pull down one or two that businesses have left us. But that was out there. So again, we had a lot of beige in our community, and we wanted to cover it up a little bit. Wanted to bring some color and let local artists showcase their work. We've been hearing that a lot of artists were going to Phoenix and other communities to show their work, and they didn't feel like there was an opportunity to get their work shown, especially beginning artists. And we wanted to add more color, and we thought, well, this is an easy thing. One of our issues is that we have a mural ordinance that includes an $1,800 design review fee. That was more than we wanted to do. So looking at opportunities for how do we get around having to pay $1,800 for a design review fee, well, our thought was how do we make it as temporary and as small as possible, and if someone says that they don't like it, we can easily take it down or move it to another place. So we, again, through NEDCO, we got a small grant that allowed us to buy some plywood and some primer, and one of our local business owners was able to send out a call to artists, and she and her husband cut all the plywood to the exact shape that would fit on the column, and she got a great response from artists across the area, including a local arts high school. We had tattoo shops, and their artists did some amazing stuff, as well as some more established community artists. We also had the resource where we had a number of trellises that didn't have any plants on them, so we thought this would be the perfect way to put these on there without having to damage columns or anything like that. And in the end, we ended up with 27 of these mini murals, and by 24 different artists. Some of them have been lost to weather, and others have been taken home, but most of them are still up downtown, and they just add a nice little bit of color, and they just seem like part of the community now. So as we scroll up in the expense, so we've gone from very, very cheap to slightly more expensive. Our next one up was hosting a movie night. Again, that vacant lot was one of the things that have just been sitting vacant since the 70s or 80s. And how do we activate it? How do we show more people that there is stuff down here? We have tons of great local businesses, and people don't know about them. So, and when you come down, there's not other people, and we know that people attract people. So we decided a movie night would be a great way to involve families and bring people together. So we started movies on Main Street. Fortunately, we had movie rights that were paid by our local transit agency while they were busy building the light rail extension. We had a bunch of volunteers that helped us set up, and the transit agency also printed all the flyers that our volunteers could distribute to the local schools and to surrounding businesses to make sure that people knew about it. And of course, Facebook was a big help in getting the word out. We had support from Nedco again to rent the sound equipment every month. And then our local business improvement district would drop off some of their metal barricades to keep people away from our equipment. But basically, it was a projector strapped to a ladder, projecting on a wall with some speakers and the legal permission to show a movie. We even got event insurance for the property owner, but that was able to be rolled into our second Friday event insurance for another event that was happening down the street. But we never had a single issue. And just at the beginning, we offered free popcorn, but we used it as an effort to bring more people to Main Street. And before the movie, we even projected the phone numbers of restaurants that would deliver to the site, and even one of our local Mexican restaurants would bring a pile of burritos and sell them directly to the families. We would have on every night between 150 and 350 people, and mostly parents and children who don't usually come to downtown, especially in the evenings. And one of the cool things that I don't know if you can see, but we were able to paint a cool 1980s style TV as a frame to project the movies in. So again, as we scale up, we're still not allowed to put murals up on our walls. What are another way we can do this? What are ways that we can engage artists with this? This was through a program called Creative Catalyst, which was a partnership between Nedco and the Mesa Arts Center to engage younger people in the arts in downtown as sort of a community arts activation. And what we did is we actually built these, they're cubes, but as you can see here, they're in an accordion shape against the wall, to create temporary movable pieces that we could bring to events as a cube, have people paint new things so you could see live art, or put up blackboard paint and draw on them, and then move them back to our empty lot to store them up against the wall, secure, and so people wouldn't sleep behind them or hide behind them or cause an issue. And so at a music festival, we had 16 artists were paid a very small stipend plus a ticket to a show and a limited number of spray paint cans to just have them paint on the street. And it was really great, really attractive pieces. They're all designed to be painted over and reused. In hindsight, we would have designed them to have the work removed and install a new piece of plywood rather than painting over. We had a lot of tears shed in being able in painting over some of these beautiful works. Another thing is the idea of just throwing a party. At our community garden, we had a number of people that really think that we should have more of the local artists would come, and we just did that. And very small project costs. We had about $100 that we paid as an honorarium to the musicians that showed up and who volunteered for no pay, but we came together as volunteers to just pull some cash and put that in there. And then we spent about $50 buying food to sell. We made quesadillas, coffee, and hot cocoa, and we brought in almost $200 in donations. So we paid for the event ourselves. Had more than 300 people show up to the event and experience a great outdoor event and in a community garden with live music and more than 20 artists showing their work, one or two pieces up on these little pillars we had. And it was a great way to just bring energy to the downtown. The restaurant next door had a great night, as you can imagine. And it was easy. It was just volunteers planning an event, and not a lot of money, and a great way to just bring community together. So one of the other things that we've done is taken a look at what other things are happening, what are our other events that are happening, and how do we make sure that our businesses and our businesses see the impact of those events, and how do we make sure that more people are experiencing them. So we knew that light rail was coming. There was going to be a grand opening of the light rail, and it was going to be in the morning in August. And our thought was that it's going to be really hot really quickly here in the valley. And we thought that maybe people might show up for the morning event, but they're going to go home for the middle of the day. But a lot of people might actually be interested in coming in the evening, and no one was going to do an event in the evening. So as a group of volunteers and local business owners, and with our local business support nonprofit, Nedco, we banded together and said, hey, let's throw a party. We didn't have a lot of money. Basically, we had about $300 or $500 that we're able to put towards the project. We put it all towards bands and performers. Two of us got together and put a call out to the greater community, and we ended up having more than 80 vendors and artists set up along Main Street. We had scheduled the fire performers and bands, and we had thought people would be there, and we were right. We had way more than 1,000 people show up. We encouraged our businesses to be open during this event for that evening to show people that, hey, we do have cool things down here, and if we have one thing happening, we should have more people. Let's extend the event. Let's find more reasons to party. And then finally, the last thing I want to show you is probably our most expensive project and our most involved project, but we have a parklet, or parklet, depending on how you spell it. We had a little alley that cars went down the middle. The city owns the middle part. So the city owns this middle part, but private property owners on both sides. And we had a larger budget because the city was involved and they really wanted to do this, so our council wanted to be involved. They really liked the idea of, we had that weird surface that was hard to walk on, and we put state grass down on it as a temporary thing, and then we also hired an artist to paint blocks, and then we built some giant games and then find as much stuff as we could. We even have a little free library that showed up. And we transformed basically what was a driveway that not even a lot of cars used into a space where we could do pop-up events. At one of the events that we're not involved with, they even scheduled a band there. We installed a giant Jenga, which I made, I think, in $20 worth of plywood in an evening at cutting those pieces and sanding them nice. And, of course, the giant battleship, which I think is the most fun, and a Connect 4 game as well. And we also installed lights across the top. And you can see that this was a partnership between building owner, and then the city space that was in between to allow it to go over. And all this effort actually led to a lot of reinvestment by our property owners and our business owners in being able to put a little bit of money, tidy things up, make things look pretty, paint things, spruce everything up. It was great to see that investment. This was a wedding venue that had a back entrance, and they hired one of the artists we were working with to actually do a big, beautiful mural just as a back entrance. It was great. So we had many, many lessons learned and many things that we did wrong and things we would do differently now. So the first thing that I would say is don't ask for permission. And I don't mean that as in just doing things and not actually getting permission to do things or doing things the wrong way. But instead, work closely with community leaders and find ways to get around permission. So if they say, if the rules in your community say you can't paint on the wall without this, well, can you put up a board in front of that wall that you can take down? Is that allowable? Find lots of ways to get around having to ask for permission, do things that don't require permission. Because a lot of times permission will hold you up more than anything else. And it's easy to get discouraged, or especially when you're working with volunteers. So we push boundaries, but it's always about working with your community, working with, if you are a volunteer and you want to do something, getting to know your city and the business owners and the other people that are involved in the area you're working with, so they can learn to trust that what you're doing is with good intention and you're going to try and do that. Pushing boundaries also can help clean up codes that have outlasted their usefulness, and allows you to work with those who manage the codes to make sure that they're getting fixed. So for example, our mural code that was so onerous before, we actually are still in the process of getting it changed, but we got a temporary permission from our design review board to allow a number of murals to go up. And we went from having a total of about 3 or 4 murals in our downtown to more than 20 in less than a year. And it's really added a lot of color, and it's been very well received. Also, finding your allies and co-conspirators. So this is all about the building community, and it's finding people that want to get things done. So who are those people that want to host a bunch of people to come over to their house and paint things in their backyard on a Thursday night? Who are the people that will show up to get things done and plot scheme in a positive way? Also, be prepared to fail and get pushback. Almost all of our projects were things that we could easily undo. If there was too much pushback or if they failed, we could fix them. We could just take them down or undo what we've been done. If something was so bad and we could just paint over it. There's a group out there that calls this tactical urbanism. It's going in and finally trying things out, touching things and experimenting. And part of that is failing. So for example, that rock example, we picked up rocks in front of businesses up and down our main street. We painted them and we put them back down in front of businesses along Main Street. And the first thing we heard the next day was, hey, you put all these rocks in front of our business. Now they're going to be thrown through our windows. And we were like, well, those rocks were there before. But we kindly picked up all of the rocks and we took them to the community garden, and they're very pretty over there now. So it's something that we thought wouldn't be a big deal. We got some pushback and we said, it's fine. It was a fun project and it can go live a life somewhere else. More than all, this is really a project about making community, about building community. You're doing this for the sake of building a community with customers and the public that's coming to your Main Street and the business owners and the city. So invite your friends, make new friends, have fun, because you are part of that community, and the bigger coalition you build, the more people you have that are there seeing the success. the more successful you've been. So that's all I have for me, and I'm ready to pass this on to Eric.
Okay, hello everybody. Can you hear me? I guess I won't know if you can hear me. I'll just assume you can. All right, so the State Historic Preservation Offices were created in 1966 as part of the National Historic Preservation Act. We serve as the state arm of the Federal Preservation Program, so we're a state agency representing the state in the federal program. Every state and territory has a SHPO. There's 59 of them total, including places like, well, Washington, D.C. and the U.S. Virgin Islands and places like that. And here in Arizona, the State Historic Preservation Office is housed within Arizona State Parks. The National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 was preceded by a period of conflict in the 1950s and early 60s. Urban renewal and the increase in transportation-related development brought by suburbanization caused demolition of the historic core of many cities, including New York City. The demolition of Penn Station in particular drew much media attention and galvanized several vociferous figures in the preservation movement, including urbanist Jane Jacobs, who you've heard mentioned a couple of times so far today, and Ada Louise Huxtable, who was a journalist and art critic. The end result of this was the NHPA Act that created the National Register of Historic Places and required federal agencies to try to avoid destroying historic properties and to document them when they came across them. A large portion of our preservation work is focused on downtowns, be it downtown Phoenix or downtown Tucson or the downtowns of Kingman, Casa Grande, Nogales, Bisbee, or wherever. It flourishes in areas of towns developed before the era of big box stores and chain store architecture. And it also flourishes in places that strive to be someplace rather than any place. It's in these places that new businesses are often flourishing as well. Old commercial neighborhoods are often incubator spaces for new entrepreneurs. Heritage tourism and preservation are closely connected. Here's two quick examples of that. Top one is the La Posada Hotel, which was designed by Mary Coulter for Fred Harvey. Mary Coulter designed a lot of the buildings up at the Grand Canyon. La Posada there opened its doors in 1930, and it served tourists coming by railroad on their way to the Grand Canyon. But by 1960, it was mostly gutted. It was used for, part of it was used for railroad offices for many years, but in 1994, the building was bought by Alan Affeldt, who invested $12 million in it and leveraged tax credits to rehabilitate the building back to a working hotel and restaurant. When Pixar was getting ready to film the movie Cars, they traveled the length of Route 66, and I was at a conference where one of the people who was on that tour of Route 66 was speaking, and he said their night at the La Posada was the highlight of their entire trip along Route 66. The bottom photo there is of the Yuma Territorial Prison State Park. It's an example of dark tourism, one of many niche markets that falls under the umbrella of heritage tourism. I always recommend people go to the prison in August so they can get a good idea of how horrible it was to have been in prison there. Prison dates from the 1880s, but it's referenced in many movies like 3:10 to Yuma and The Wild Bunch. It's also a great place to stop if you're on your way to San Diego. So heritage tourism in particular is important for rural Arizona, and historic resources play a huge part of it. This is data that comes from Arizona State Parks, and it shows the impact of their historic parks on the counties they're located in. So you can see that in 2014 there was over $20 million worth of an economic impact to those communities from those parks, and over 250 jobs that were created. Curley School is a great example of an adaptive reuse project. Curley School in Ajo, I should say, is a great example of an adaptive reuse project that also availed itself of federal tax credits, which I'll talk about a little bit later. This project was sponsored by the International Sonoran Desert Alliance, an organization focused on creating ecological and cultural sustainability through cross-border initiatives. Rehabilitation of the City Beautiful School complex into the Curley School Artisan Apartments, a $9.2 million project in 2007, was a centerpiece project that transformed Ajo from a sleepy former mining town into a vibrant arts community. Rehab of that school soon transformed to the rehab of the town square and the train depot. And now Ajo boasts a conference center. Influx of small investment into Ajo has also resulted in the rehabilitation of many of the small bungalows that ring the downtown area. Drawing on Jane Jacobs' observation that new ideas require old buildings, we see a lot of great rehabs hosting great small businesses. So the Bayless grocery store on 7th Street in Phoenix, just south of Roosevelt, has in recent years been incubated as a CrossFit gym, an electric bike company, a co-working space, a microbrewery, and also a marijuana-themed restaurant called Chiba Hut. But that co-working space, I want to take a moment and talk about that. It was called Cahoots, and its founder, Jenny Poon, just won the Phoenix Business Journal's Entrepreneur of the Year award. As her business grew, though, she left this place, moved into a different historic building, and as it continued to grow, she moved into a third historic building. So she has moved into and incubated in 3 different historic buildings in the Phoenix area. At the bottom there is the former Beefeater's Steakhouse, which was a big restaurant in the valley in the 70s and 80s, but sat abandoned and was considered a neighborhood eyesore for many years. Now it's been redeveloped and turned into the Newton, which houses the popular bookstore Changing Hands, also which includes its own bar called First Draft. Also has a restaurant, a gardening shop, and event space located within it. Many of our historic buildings were built to last and have materials such as adobe and concrete and massing and design elements that create efficiency. Demolition of these buildings creates a burden on our landfills, as construction debris currently comprise over 25% of total waste in landfills. A study by the National Trust for Historic Preservation found that even when counting for increased energy efficiency, it takes between 10 and 80 years for newly constructed buildings to overcome the adverse climate change impact that the new building's construction entails. SHPO helped to fund a study in the city of Tucson by the National Trust for Historic Preservation's Preservation Green Lab. Using a variety of data sources, the study sought to prove many of Jane Jacobs' observations. Preservation Green Lab had done similar studies in larger coastal communities like I think San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and one other one, Seattle. But they had never done one in a medium-sized desert city, and they attempted to quantify the quality of life factors that Jacobs observed in neighborhoods with a mix of old and new buildings. And some of their key findings were that Tucson's older and historic neighborhoods and commercial districts are literally cooler due to having more vegetation. Areas with older, smaller buildings are also more walkable, promote multimodal transportation. Best of Tucson businesses, best of Tucson is in quotes from, best of Tucson surveys and such, are disproportionately located in areas of building diversity. Areas with older and smaller buildings have a greater concentrations of jobs in areas with large new buildings. Areas with older, smaller buildings have a higher concentration of creative and/or startup company jobs. Neighborhoods with older and smaller buildings of mixed vintage have a younger and more diverse age populations. And adaptive reuse of buildings cost an average of 60% less than new construction and thus remained a stable force of jobs and revenue generation during the economic downturn. In fact, as a result of this study, which just came out in November, the city of Tucson is looking at creating its own adaptive reuse program for old buildings based off of the city of Phoenix's program. These figures are from the National Park Service fiscal year 2015 report on the impact of the federal historic tax credit on job growth. Predictably, construction jobs see the highest benefit, followed by manufacturing. So now I'll tell you a bit about the federal tax credit, something which we'd love to see more of in rural Arizona. It encourages private sector investment in the rehabilitation and reuse of historic buildings by giving a 20% income tax credit on qualified rehabilitation expenditures. Since its inception in 1976, the credit has involved over 41,000 completed projects and generated over $120 billion of investment and more than 2 million jobs nationwide. The program is run by the National Park Service via the State Historic Preservation Offices and also in partnership with the IRS. So we represent the National Park Service at the state and interface with them for you so you wouldn't have to. Buildings must be eligible or listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and the cost of rehabilitation, planned rehabilitation, must exceed the value of the building minus the cost of the land, which isn't actually as tough to do as it sounds. In 2015, there were nearly $5 billion invested into rehabilitation that were certified through the National Park Service, resulting in nearly $1 billion in tax credits nationwide. There's basically 3 steps to this, to doing this, which is the first one is, they're creatively called Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. Part 1 is essentially checking to see if it's listed on the National Register. If it is, move on to Part 2, and if it's not, basically write a nomination, so it will be sometime within the next 3 years of being certified. Part 2 is the rehabilitation, where the architect provides plans. We look at it, we see if we think it's okay, and we pass it up to the National Park Service to see if they think it's okay. And once everybody agrees everything's okay, we can move on to Part 3. All of those rehabilitation standards have to be in keeping with the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties, which is a set of 10 guidelines that are pretty vague and fairly easy to use. Part 3 is the certification of completed work, where we basically come out, tour the property, and make sure everything was done that was said to be done, and then we tell the National Park Service we've seen it and provide them with completed photographs, and then they will talk to the IRS about getting your tax credits through. Now, in Arizona, we've not seen as much interest in this program as other states. You can see by this map, they've been predominantly clustered in Phoenix and Tucson. And most of the preservation projects that have happened in rural Arizona historically have happened through the Arizona Heritage Fund, which no longer exists. It was swept in 2009 during the recession. However, things are looking brighter, with a $40 million project that was the Hilton Garden Inn in downtown Phoenix that opened in 2016, and then a different $40 million project that's currently underway in South Phoenix called Cofell-Lamoureux Housing Project. We're about to see these numbers jump up some, but we'll still be a far cry from where other cities are with this. So as you can see, for 2015, we're down at 42nd. That blue arrow represents where Arizona is. New York comes in number 1 with over $600 million in revenue from historic tax credits. And your first thought might be, well, that makes sense because New York and some of the other cities, there are states there like Virginia or Massachusetts or Louisiana have a lot more historic properties to deal with, so of course they're going to have a higher amount of these. But that's not really the case. Property only has to be 50 years old to qualify for this, potentially qualify for this. So that brings us to 1967 right now, and Arizona was booming in the 50s and 60s, so it's not really a shortage of building stock. The real difference, and you'll notice that there's red and blue bars on this graph. The red bars represent states that have a state match, in other words, a state tax credit that matches the federal one, where the blue ones don't. So, and that's when these tax credits really take off. Arizona does not have one. In fact, most of the western states do not. The 2 states that have most recently enacted these state tax credit programs that match the federal one are Wisconsin and Texas, 2 traditionally red states. And Texas is about to release a report on the impact of the state tax credit, and I have a spy in their office who's going to get me a copy when it comes out. We do have a state program for commercial income producing properties in Arizona, but it's so radically different from the federal one that nobody really considers it to be comparable unless we were left off that graph from the previous slide. The program that we have is taxes, improvements, and property tax one, and improvements are taxed at 1% instead of the normal 19.5. So in other words, you have a building, you submit plans to us in the county assessor's office, and the county assessor, once we approve it, will tax any improvements you do at the property at 1% for a single 10-year period. It can be used in conjunction with the federal tax credit. In fact, it's almost always used together. We've had very few properties that have ever used it by itself. And across the state, active right now, there's probably about 30 of these projects that are going on. What we do have that most states don't is a tax reduction for owners of non-income producing historic properties. That requires your house to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and by joining, you're basically agreeing to maintain the characteristics that qualify that building for listing. Now, I've chosen this photo in particular because it's a fairly modest house that's listed on the National Register as part of the historic district, and it's got a brand new metal roof on it, which it didn't used to have a metal roof. We were fine with them putting on a metal roof because roofing doesn't really matter to the status of most properties. So we're not trying to make everybody live in a museum. We're just trying to get them to, say, not turn that modest house into a Tudor revival or something really strange like that. There's about 7,000 properties around the state that are currently in this program, as opposed to the 30 or so that are in the other one. This program continues to grow every year, and it lasts for 15 years, and then you renew. I'm going to skip over the two Main Street slides so we can get to the questions because, well, Lonnie covered everything that was in there. This is a list, by the way. The highlighted ones are the current existing Main Street communities, and the other ones were the ones I could find that used to be in there. One of the problems with our data is most of the data from when the Department of Commerce used to house the Main Street program disappeared when they became the Commerce Authority, so when we picked it up, we largely started from scratch. But anyway, I hope I didn't go through that too quick for anybody, but oh, one last slide. So this photo here is of the professional building, which is now the Hilton Garden Inn, the $40 million project I mentioned earlier. It sat abandoned for many, many years, and this is a photo from the time when it was abandoned. And one of the reasons it took so long was because we lacked that state tax credit. So we would love to have a state companion for that. Now, there are bills at the national level that might wipe out that historic tax credit along with a bunch of other tax credits like the low-income housing credit. And we're hoping that doesn't happen because both the state historic tax credit and the low-income housing credits are very popular. Bipartisan, has a lot of bipartisan support, but still there's a plan to wipe out a bunch of tax credits out there, and that will be collateral damage. So anyway, I think that concludes everything. Let me make sure. Yeah, there's my contact information up there. So that's it. I'll turn it back over to everyone else.
Maya, are you going to field the questions or should we?
I think this means we're fielding questions.
Okay.
We can't unmute them.
No.
So I guess they have to type in questions.
Yes. I see Deborah is typing a question. Eric, I think that would be a question for you.
Yeah. Deborah's question, is there any incentive for longevity of occupancy? Unfortunately not. There's no incentive either nationally or at the state level that rewards people for keeping their buildings in shape and continuing to occupy them. There was an attempt at one point at the state level to do that. However, it was shot down because it was felt that it would give Monty's La Casa Vieja, a restaurant in Tempe that's housed in a historic building that was very popular at the time. This was in the 1980s when this bill was around. That they felt that it would give Monty's an unfair tax advantage over its competition, and so they shot down the bill that would have given an incentive for people who stay in historic buildings.
Great. So our next
I believe
question.
it would.
Okay, our next question is, would Phoenix, okay, Beth. So I'm sorry, just to reiterate, I'm going to read the question out loud and then the speaker can reply to whomever you all think is appropriate, but I just want the listeners to know since this is going to be recorded. So the question was, would Phoenix adaptive reuse plan translate well to rural?
I believe it would, but to be honest with you, I don't think any of the three of us are particularly well versed in the details of it, since none of us work for the city of Phoenix. We can get someone in touch with you if you'd like to talk about it, though.
I did do a little bit of work in researching both Phoenix, Chandler's, and Tempe's adaptive reuse programs, and yeah, I think that it could be used for any community because it's really about streamlining the processes and looking for things within the code that are legal but just need a little bit of permission from staff to be able to do.
Brilliant, thank you. The next question is, could you repeat the info about Cahoots, the person behind the project, and what award it just won? Thank you.
Yeah, it's Cahoots actually has a plus sign between the co and the hoots. And it was, the person's name is Jenny Poon, P-O-O-N, and she won the, let's see if I can find it real fast here. That's the Phoenix Business Journal's Entrepreneur of the Year, I believe is what it was called. And I'm still flipping through trying to get to the right page that tells me the exact thing, and it should be this page here. Yep, Phoenix Business Journal's Entrepreneur of the Year. Oh yeah, and David put Cahoots up there with its website.
Great. It looks like we have a few more questions that might be coming in. All right, we have the question for Mesa. Are you proactive in looking for appropriate entrepreneurs to fill vacant space?
So yeah, Mesa is pretty proactive in that type of activity. One of our things that I think it took us a while to realize with is that we don't have a lot of truly vacant space. We have spaces that perhaps are underutilized, or but our actual spaces that have true vacancy are more difficult to fill. But we have a community development financial institution, NEDCO, that I was talking about before. They work with small business and try and support small business, either with loans or with business education. And we also try and work with their economic development agency. They've gotten a lot better at looking at small projects that might fill in with their downtown. Up until a few years ago, downtown felt that they were really left out of economic development because they're always looking out on the fringes of town. That's why I mentioned that downtown Mesa is often, I feel like we're just a city unto our own in the greater community. But we've spent a lot of time and effort over the past few years in bringing together the right team to be able to pull that together, both from a volunteer standpoint and also from our members.
Thanks, Stephen. Another question is, do any municipalities in Arizona have a quote-unquote mothball ordinance requiring property owners to secure and maintain the buildings and prevent the deterioration of historical buildings that are vacant?
I'm unaware of any. I know it's been discussed in certain communities, but I think everybody's been afraid to really approach it since Prop 207 was passed now, decade ago, I guess. Places like Superior and Hayden and some of those sort of central Arizona mining communities had discussed such things, but to my knowledge, none have ever enacted one.
Great. Are there any more questions? We have potential question.
Maya, this is Lonnie.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes, Lonnie.
Thank you, everybody.
I wanted to just, I don't know if you were going to highlight who was going to be speaking at our part 2 series.
Yep. Well, I'm not quite there yet, but you can certainly highlight them in a moment for me if you would.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
just talking about what's coming up next with Local First Arizona. On February 3rd, we have a webinar that we will soon send out some information to our rural network and potentially on Facebook. And if you're interested after this presentation, you can email me. My contact will be up in a moment. But this webinar is titled Water/Ways, and it's hosted by the Smithsonian Institution that brings traveling exhibits to rural Arizona communities. And the Waterways exhibit is beginning in June 2018 through April 2020. Waterways explores the cultural and environmental impact of water on our landscape, settlement, migration, and culture. And each of the 12 selected sites will host the exhibit for 6 weeks, develop public programs, connect with local partners, and share their own community water story. This program is a great opportunity for cultural organizations, libraries, museums, schools, colleges, community centers, businesses, and towns to collaborate and become a catalyst for recognition in the community. And that webinar informational session will be on February 3rd from 10 to 11:30 a.m. On February 22nd, we'll have another rural development webinar titled Bridging Education and the Workforce for Strong Communities. This will be free to attend along with the other 2 webinars listed on this page. And that will we'll have a promotional sort of email information sent out in the next couple days for that webinar, and you'll be seeing it on our Facebook page as well. And then, as Lonnie was mentioning, there will be a part 2 to this refresh of the Main Street Framework series on March 15th from 10 through 11:30 a.m. Once again, it's also free. And Lonnie, if you want to mention the presenters that will be.
Yes. It will be less of me and more of 3 examples and of activities and projects in our communities. And we'll have Reina Reen from Casa Grande Main Street program. She will be highlighting the Casa Grande Main Street use of a robust promotional strategy to attract various audiences to downtown throughout the year, as well as showcase how their Main Street has successfully integrated art, heritage, and culture into their overall economic brand and strategy. I'll have Jennifer Evans. She's the management analysis for the town of Florence. And she's going to discuss the critical role that business and entrepreneurship development plays in their revitalization of their historic commercial district. She's going to highlight the tools and incentives that the town of Florence have used to retain and expand and recruit businesses and entrepreneurs. And then finally, I'm going to have Laura Sabine she is the design chair of the Buckeye Main Street Coalition and president of Sabine Studios in Buckeye. And she's going to highlight the various projects and placemaking elements that the Buckeye Main Street Coalition, the city of Buckeye, and the downtown stakeholders have been installing in downtown. That includes public art, wayfinding programs, streetscape improvements, public amenities, and banners. And I saw her partial presentation at the last preservation conference, and it's fabulous what they've done there. Very grassroots, really innovative type of activities and projects. So those will be the 3 speakers.
Brilliant. Well, I'd once again like to thank all of the presenters and most importantly the participants as well for being a part of this change that we're trying to create throughout our rural communities. So I really hope that you all can tune in next month and keep looking out for new information, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions or feedback. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.